thank you everyone for joining for this fourth webinar. My name is Kevin Coquillon. I'm Deputy Attaché for Science and Technology at the Embassy of France. And I'm really glad to be having this webinar today, where we will be talking about development around train stations and hear more about the collaboration between the University of Maryland and the University of Gustave Eiffel in France. And without further ado, I will let the floor to Nacima Baron and Isabelle Gournay to present the collaboration between the two universities and introduce the next speakers. I'm glad to have you all here, and I'll start the presentation right now and leave the floor to Nacima. So.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and good morning, everybody, or good evening, depends the place. I'm very delighted to open this webinar. I think it's a great opportunity for my university, my research department, LVMT, to have the possibility to present some elements that are in the bulk of joint work research we had not a decade ago almost, but a few years ago, and which is a continuing process of interchanging experiences concerning the development of intermodal changes, railway stations and tram stations in the context of metropolization, planning, land use, transport. The topic now today is from intermodal changes to fair and connected station districts. We will have two presentations of specific researchers on specific topics, but first and foremost, I've proposed to Isabelle Gournay to contextualize both institutions and the conditions in which we have opened and developed this partnership. So perhaps Isabelle Gournay for the retrospective of our collaboration.
Okay, thank you very much. May I have a next slide, please? Okay, so my name is Isabelle Gournay. Actually, I'm retired from the University of Maryland, and as my accent probably shows, I'm not American. I have lived in the United States for half of my life and worked at Maryland for 26 years. So I'm really very happy to be able to participate because Franco-American connections are really what I am working on, mostly as a historian, but also as someone interested in planning. Just a short introduction to the Center for Smart Growth, which is the organization headed by Gerrit Knaap, who is our speaker, and is part of a larger spectrum of environmental studies at the University of Maryland in the College Park campus, which is the flagship campus of the University of Maryland system. So what I have tried to do in this slide is to show you the connection, the intimate connection between the Center for Smart Growth, which is what, 20 years old now, Gerrit? And the School of Architecture, which was actually created only in the late 1960s. It's not a very old school. So our school offers, of course, architecture, but also urban studies and planning, historic preservation, and real estate. So it's an interesting combination. It has a PhD program and a great number of master's degree where you can mix and match the disciplines. So the Center for Smart Growth basically caters to the entire population of professors and students in the what we now call the built environment school, not to make architecture so prominent, because architecture is just one among the things we are interested in. So here in the middle, I have shown these are the focus areas of the Center for Smart Growth as indicated on their website, which I highly recommend to look at. It's very interesting and quite interactive, gives you really a good sense of how prominent the outreach of the Smart Growth Center is important. So the notion of community, being creative, the notion of placemaking is really important. Planning and land use are obviously at the core of what the Center of Smart Growth does and is related to its studies of transportation. But here I would like to focus on the international section of this work, which is very important. And this is how we were able to, a few years ago, to have a seminar which allowed our French colleagues to come to Washington, give us some talks, but also visit some interesting sites of transformation. And then we were able to go to Paris, where we were entertained with a fantastic series of lectures, some by very prominent personalities in the field of transportation. And we visited also places which were a little bit out of the way, especially in northern Paris, and learned an awful lot about what's going on in Paris. So this yielded a series of articles which have been collected in a book, which hopefully will be out pretty soon. My participation was actually a kind of historical survey of connections and differences between transportation modes and land use, transportation-induced land use in Paris and Washington. And there are very interesting historical roots to what we're going to talk about today. Thank you very much. So Nacima, you can go ahead. And
yes.
if I have forgotten to say something, you let me know.
The second half of this bilateral seminar in which we met, it's LVMT, so a few words about the counterpart, the French counterpart, UGE counterpart, which was at this time LVMT. So Ville Mobilité Transport is our research department together with Alain. We're about, I would say, 63 researchers or enseignants-chercheurs, so professors, involved, I would say, in you see 4 axes, I would say, as disciplinary fields. I would say 1/3 in modelization, traffic modelization, and quantitative approaches of traffic and transport systems. 1/3 in a socioeconomic survey concerning transport and mobility demand forecast, and 1/3 more oriented toward planning, public transport and mobility public policy, as well as the conception of hubs, multimodal hubs, or either other mobility and transport systems and place. LVMT is, of course, Université Gustave Eiffel research department, as well as a research department in the umbrella of École nationale des ponts et chaussées, which this is an opportunity to develop cross approach between engineering and social science and humanities in mobility and transport. So you see these axes, it's a multidisciplinary laboratory, and we work with several programs, European programs, national programs from Agence Nationale de la Recherche, as well as what we call SHARE, what is in fact a program in which institutions, private bodies are embedded. For example, the seminar, the international seminar in which we met was hosted by the Cher Gare, which was an opportunity for SNCF to develop a new approach of railway station development and redevelopment. And we were at this time at the moment of the envisioning the whole Grand Paris Express system. So it was a way to articulate the reuse, transformation, regeneration associated with great railway hubs such as Saint-Lazare and other which were ongoing projects, and PPP ongoing projects, as well as trying to see the originality, the genuine dimension, and the creative and innovative dimension of new Grand Paris Express stations and districts, of course. So we talked a lot about TOD, transit-oriented development, during this seminar, and we developed several, I would say, chapters in this shared project. I would say, thanks to Isabelle, this first contextualization of the similarities and the differences between the long-term shaping of transport and land use in the two capitals. Then we had this interest for a structuralist approach of, I would say, railway network, transport network, and this was a historical opportunity because of the production of this 15 line from Grand Paris Express, which was the first ring line in a radial system. Metro system and railway system in France are centered in Paris, which is kind of star. So this 15th line of Grand Paris Express was envisioned as a circular line, and this has to see in our way to problematize the seminar with the purple line, of course, which is another possibility of seeing the relationship between East and West and the tangential structural topology of this network. But we had also other topics concerning gentrification, eviction, and other economic and social impacts of the development of such networks on the reality, the reality of district, and the whole balance of the metropolis in terms of movements, mobility, daily mobilities, and residential mobilities. And to end with, we had this interest in the way the multimodality and I would say new mobility, bike lanes, bike sharing, as well as new free-floating systems would transform the way these hubs are used in order to connect various parts of the cities. And we have this more general question concerning the way these new mobilities can stimulate or I would say squeeze the networks, the historical networks. So in this series of questions, we have selected two elements in order to propose a discussion after two presentations. The first being research, an ongoing research, if but Alain will confirm or not, but I think it's an ongoing research based on a PhD project. And it's really interesting to see how all this subject of relationship between new mobilities and hubs and nodes, railway nodes or tram nodes has developed since I would say 4 or 5 years, because a lot of literature has been produced on these topics, and perhaps the comparison between Washington DC and Paris has can be continued. And later on we will go to the presentation of Gerrit, but first of all perhaps the floor to Alain L'Hostis.
Thank you, Nacima, for and Isabelle for introducing the topic and talking about the collaboration between UMD and the Université Gustave Eiffel. Alain, if you want to take the floor.
Sure.
To talk more about your projects.
If you can see on screen, hear my voice.
We can hear you well. We can see the presentation.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
So, hello, everybody. I will present, and thank you, Nacima, and thank you, Isabelle, for the introduction. I will effectively present an analysis of scooter plus train intermodality applied to a French region, Provençal Côte d'Azur, also known as PACA region in southern France. So the authors are Mathieu Goudot from AREP, Dylan Mouans and myself, Alain L'Hostis, from Université Eiffel, from LVMT, the institution that Nacima presented. So it's a joint work between the laboratory, LVMT, City Mobility Transport, and AREP, which is a subsidiary of SNCF that cares for stations design. And our aim is, and Nacima, you were completely right, it's an ongoing research project. It's also heavily connected to Dylan Mouans' PhD that I'm supervising. So it's a study of mobility behavior with a focus on intermodality and urban design. So it's true, as far as I know, concerning urban mobility, we have no plan B. There's no alternative to improving public transport and increasing urban density to support a sustainable urban mobility. So that's the first point. And the second point is we, in the same time, we observe new behaviors, new transport vehicles, new transport modes, and especially in this domain, micro-mobility. So this is raising our question, our problematic. Does micro-mobility in intermodality, so in intermodal combination, have the potential to reinforce public transport plus the public transport plus urban density model, the model also known as transit-oriented development, but also Nacima mentioned that was invented in the USA. So it's again a dialogue between two sides of the Atlantic. So we basically will exploit a survey and finish by a case study of a railway station. So we start with a literature survey, and we have gathered about more than 100 sources, starting from 2016 on the scooters, but more generally starting in 2019. So it's very recent literature. Most papers, so I have a color codes here that we will find across the presentation. So personal scooters are in orange, and rental services, so shared e-scooters, shared e-scooters are in green. So most of the literature is on free-floating electric scooters, in fact. But this ratio is decreasing, so we have more and more about personal scooters. And 1/3 of the literature focuses on intermodality. And Europe is leading if we look at the geography of the sources and the studies. So Europe is leading. What more? Okay, so now let's look at the socioeconomic profile of the users. And maybe the most striking or significant observation across literature is the over-representation of male users, men. And this is about 70% of scooter users are male in Europe. it's completely an echo to what we observe for bicycle, which is dominated by male usage, but we have no empirics at this stage for e-scooters, but we have some elements regarding bikes. We know that this unbalanced distribution in favor of men may be corrected if usage grows, if usage increases. Maybe there's a notion of critical mass somewhere, a feeling of security that improves, new infrastructures. All this bicycle system, if it's developing, then the balance corrects itself and women become there's more balance between men and women at this level. We don't know we know this for the bicycle system. We don't know about the scooter, but we could hypothesize that it could be the case. Regarding age, users' ages is quite young. We have a median in the 25 to 30 years old category. So let's see how what is the frequency of use of this system. Most users ride. So you see my color code. So most of the literature is green, which means shared scooters, and you have a few elements in literature on personal in yellow scooters. So most users ride several times per month on rented scooters. So we have a typical profile for scooter users, mostly men, students and professionals, mostly high-skilled professionals, young people. And if we look at purposes, what dominates is work and recreation, social interaction. But we also see that purposes, they cover all the range of classical mobility purposes. So scooters is a full transport mode. It's not a marginal, or it seems to really be a mode in itself. That's the first point. And the second point is we have a literature that also covers crisis, strikes in Paris and the pandemic everywhere. And what we have, the elements we have from the empirics is use of e-scooters is maintains or even increases during these crises. So it seems to be a resilient transport system, transport mode. We know by studying the market of e-scooters sold in France, 600,000 e-scooters were sold in France in 2020. It's a market share a market that grows of 1/3 over the previous year. So e-scooters belong to the mobility landscape now. So we have a first question now: is it a self-sustained mode, or do we have intermodal use, and what is the share of intermodal use regarding e-scooters? So I have two slides on intermodal practice. First, from the user perspective, and then we'll see from TRIP's perspective. So we have several papers that focused on intermodal use of e-scooters. The intermodality is about 1/3 in the USA and 2/3 and even more in European cases, with combination with public transport. So in France, in 2016, we had about 1% of, it's really early, 2016, but at that time, we have a survey by Georgia that says that about 1% of train users access the station with a scooter. At that time, it was kick scooter, the non-electric scooter, and the electric scooter. So let's look beyond. So we have sources of users' declaration, but we have also sources about at the trip level, which are maybe more accurate. And at the trip level, we see that about 1/3 of all scooter trips are intermodal. And this intermodality depends a lot of the local urban conditions. Public transport, and we have a lot of sources in France. Most sources are in France. Public transport is a preferred combination in France, public transport plus e-scooters, plus scooters, as opposed to the US case in Austin, Texas, where we have a significant intermodality with car, which is not a surprise. Maybe the last element I want to stress here is the fact that we have a lot of intermodality with train, with rail, heavy rail. If we look at distance crossed, so we have a lot of empirics for distances. For all trips, the empirical elements we have focus on a relatively short distance between 1.5 and 3 kilometers. But intermodal trips tend to be longer, around 4 kilometers in scooter, to and from public stations. And it's empirics from the Paris case, which is a bit specific because the survey tells us that users tend to go straight to the main stations, the main heavy rail stations in Paris. You are probably all aware that the railway system in Paris is scattered. The heavy rail, sorry, the long distance rail is scattered in several terminal stations distributed in the central area of Paris. So there's a typical journey is from home, joining the long distance railway station to by scooter. So that's why the distance is longer in the Paris case, 4 kilometers. But we have also a study by Richer and Rabot in France that is exploiting the larger an aggregation of urban mobility surveys, and they say 23 kilometers for complete intermodal trips. So that's the figures we have down the slide. Okay, so let's talk about our own empirical material that focuses on train users. Train users in the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region. We have material for 12 railway stations. They are highlighted in the map. The survey was conducted in the fall 2020. It's a survey that is conducted by SNCF in the context of the creation of the future high-speed railway. The project of the future high-speed railway between Marseille, if you see my cursor, Marseille and Nice, because a high-speed rail currently from Paris arrives in Marseille but not beyond. So this is a survey that is conducted by SNCF to prepare for this this future high-speed railway. So what do we derive from this? And we will start with studying the access mode to the stations. And what we have is walking as the dominant mode of access. Maybe I should say that PACA region is really a region where human settlement is concentrated on the seashore. Sorry, Mediterranean Sea is just in the south. So yeah, it's really a very dense a region with a lot of urban density along the railway lines. In fact, so walking is dominant. Then we have private car, we have bike, which is about 3%. So despite the good weather there, bike is not really used. And we have a mode share of about 2% for scooters, which is significant. So we have 53 observations out of a sample of 2,500 surveys. So let's look at the profile of the users compared to the other profile of the users in the survey. So for the scooter users in red, what we observe is an overrepresentation of young users, not the so young, but the 18 to 24, 18 to 30, 34 category, but which is similar to the general distribution of train users. But maybe the most significant observation is gender. Gender, because we have the part of male users is completely dominant, more than 80%. So it's even more than bicycle users in our survey, in our sample. So we know that this is a typical feature of bicycle. So what we have for scooters is even more unbalanced gender distribution. If we look at the distribution of frequencies, so we have a very high frequency of this mode as a feeder to train. Remember, it's really train users in intermodality in this study. So it's not an occasional mode. I'm not sure my English is good. Sorry, but it's really used often. So this observation tends to show us how practical it can be in a daily use, because the scooter users are dominantly commuting. Train is a commuting system in this region. So let's look at distance, and we have so distance was only available for 46 out of the 53 scooter users in our survey, and we measured 2.4 kilometers in average. It's a value which is consistent with literature, and it's a value that is beyond walking distance and below cycling distance. Beyond average walking distance and below average cycling distance. And possibly the most interesting empirical observation in our study, in our survey, is the fact that scooters are used massively, very significantly at both ends of the trip. So people access with the e-scooter and they also egress with the e-scooter. So they access the train by the scooter, they possibly carry on board the train their scooter, and they finish their trip egress with their system. So 85% of people declare traveling to the station and from the station with their scooter. So if you combine this feature with the greater distance covered, the distance as egress and access is greater than walking distance. So we really have the recipe for the potential for this intermodal combination, which seems to be more practical than bike in this respect, because we have quite a high proportion of people using bike on both ends, but this possibly relates to shared bike at destination, possibly a slight part in folding bike. So the bigger benefit of this system is the increase of accessible destinations once out of the train. So basically, that's the idea. So let's move now to our case study and finish with some more elements and more spatial, territorial analysis on the case study. We've chosen Mouans-Sartoux railway station. It's located near in the Cannes, famously known for Festival of Cinema. Maybe you've heard of it. Now ongoing. No, it's finished. So Mouans-Sartoux belongs to this area of Cannes, So it's not a major station, it's an intermediate station. It's I mean, in this table of the observation of the railway station, sorry, it's underlined in blue. So if you see the yearly patronage is not the highest, but it's significant. What we have is we have 4.5 share of e-scooter in the access. So it's beyond, it's above, sorry, it's beyond the above average. And we also have direct observation by the people that were conducting the survey that tells us that 100% of scooters in Mouans-Sartoux are in fact e-scooters. It's not always easy to distinguish the e-scooter from the kick scooter, the non-electric one. But we have this observation by the people that conducted the survey. So we know in this survey, in this case, that all people using e-scooters are using e-scooters, electric scooters. And we will look at the spatial distribution of the trips and the residents of e-scooters and in blue and bike users in green. So we see on this small sample that we have the distance traveled with scooters is shorter than the distance by bike, slightly shorter probably. We have put in this analysis a layer of density, and I mean, especially for the non-French attendant, we have typically, what we typically have, we have old historical villages that are in dark blue, where we have higher density, and everywhere around we have the typical peri-urban fabric in light blue. So we have just an hypothesis. We don't have absolutely, we have no solid empirics, solid analysis, but what we derive from this is e-scooters users tend to live in more higher density places than bike users. So we need to confirm this by further analysis. I don't know exactly, so I welcome any suggestion how to do this. Also, in this analysis, we have superimposed two isochrone of 5 and 10 minutes of the access by bike to express the potential that we could have for development of this intermodality. So there's a high potential. And we have also superimposed with dotted red lines the cycle path and the cycle infrastructure. That's maybe possibly some missing in the map, but what we can say from this, maybe it's OpenStreetMap, data, so maybe not completely correct, but nevertheless, it's an indication that in this area we don't. Okay, bike infrastructure is not non-existent, but it is really not very developed. So it's not a bike-friendly territory, I would say. So let's move now and finish with the more immediate station surroundings. It's also here a work in progress. So we have wanted to quantify the urban design features, and especially the space allocated to each mode, based on Google Map image, and we have below the image, we have superimposed. Sorry, we have a classified space. We have classified the space of the public space. Sorry, according to the category of the transport modes. We have the legend. Okay, this way. So we have parkings. We have roadways. We have pedestrian sidewalks, pedestrian areas. We have cycle lanes. And so this is quantified, and the share of each mode in public space is shown on this camembert. I don't know if you like camembert. Okay, in this camembert, sorry. And on the other camembert is the access mode to the station. And we see the imbalance. So 60% of space is allocated to cars, but cars is only 1/3 of the access and egress mode to train. So really there's an imbalance. It's not optimal, I would say, if you put together the two figures. So there is an imbalance in this respect. And if we observe the infrastructures for bike, another alternative to car, we have a lane forbidden to cars in green, disconnecting, leading to the historical village core. So it's already a very positive feature. So it's not I mean, it's not something you find in every station in France. So it's really have to be positively noted. But obviously, much more could be done in terms of infrastructure for the alternative to the car. And if we discuss a little bit, if we come back to the gender issue, we could say that if we want to support a more sustainable transport system, we could aim at a virtuous circle where female. If I come back to make the point, if I come back to this slide where I was a bit too quick, this one, sorry. We have an overbalance of male among scooter users, and reciprocally, we have an imbalance of female as car drivers. So, as I said, if we ever want to support, if we want to support a more sustainable transport system, this virtuous circle could see female car drivers shift to scooters, to bike, by means of more dedicated infrastructures, leading to more use of those alternatives. So if I conclude, what we observe regarding e-scooters is e-scooters users, they share some similar features, characteristics with bike users. So we have a heavy gender bias. We have a lot of frequency. We have three purposes that are of a typical transport mode. Sorry, but we have also some differences and age. I didn't comment so much about age, but age is slightly different. Bikers are older than e-scooter users, tend to be older, and we have ingredients of something. A combination that could play a significant role in developing a more sustainable, carbon-free mobility system. And if I take a more urban planning perspective, I would say that if we ever want to materialize further the potential of these scooters, it would be necessary to rebalance, firstly, the urban design around station. I would say further rebalance the urban design around station in favor of the alternative to the cars. And secondly, rebalance the urban design in the peri-urban fabric. And they seem to be an essential measure to materialize this hypothesis of an extension of railway station areas, railway station influence. So that's all for me, and I thank you for your attention. And please, Kevin, if you want to take back, I know I could stop share anytime.
Yeah, I think we can leave that slide maybe on for anyone that will be interested in connecting with you and asking more questions about the presentation. But and maybe before we move to Gerrit's presentation, if there's anyone in the audience that have a question at the moment, please raise your hands and we can maybe have you comment or ask your question directly. If not, like you can also just type in your question. And I see Nacima, you have a comment. Please, Nacima.
Thank you so much, Alain, for this presentation. It's really exciting to see how rapidly this activity is growing. So it seems to be a challenge to produce knowledge in a so transformating situation. Well, I had only one question. You know, I come from geography. It was about the slopes and the reality of this place. You have a lot of stations, but perhaps what about the criteria of slope and difficulty to I would say between e-scooter and bike, normal bike, I would say, and do people select one or the other because of the difficulty to access to hills or to some parts of the city which are on high environments?
Yes, thank you, Nacima. It's a completely relevant observation. I'm aware that Grasse, by the way, famous for the perfumes. Grasse is located in an area with a lot of slopes. Mouans-Sartoux does not seem to be so touched by this, but in the region there is some hilly conditions. But your observation is
completely. Use a map of a topographical map.
Yes, no, I take this on board because it's a very relevant observation. But I would say that there's two elements. So when you have slopes for bikes, so it's in favor of, I mean, you go up the hill and you go down the hill at one level when you go to the station. So the first, so maybe the more important element to say is electric. So if you have an electric scooter, and electric scooters seems to be dominant, are dominant,
there's no effort.
Slope becomes less or even not a problem, an issue. So, but really, it's interesting your observation because it has to be discussed, and it's easy to have this information, so we could add it very easily. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm noticing that Hiroaki Suzuki just raised their hands. I will allow you to speak, Hiroaki, if you can ask your question, please, and just maybe say a few words for the audience, just to know where the question is coming from.
Hello.
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 Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. My name is Hiroaki Suzuki. I'm home as World Bank staff. And thank you very much for this presentation. I have one question. You say that the distance made by bike is longer than the distance made by e-scooter. Is it right?
By our empirics, yes, it seems to be the case.
Yeah, so this finding is a little bit intuitively, I thought that, bike user, scooter user tend to travel longer than bike user because, well, naturally, because it's powered, right? So does it mean, is it something to do with the income level of the owner of e-scooter? Because e-scooter, I believe that is more expensive than bike, so they can afford to leave the place which are closer to the station compared to bike owners. So that's my guess for why they tend to travel less distance compared to bike rider. So could you explain me why this intuitively totally opposite findings. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much for your question and more the hypothesis that you raise, because we have access to we have access of income level at geographical the GIS layer of so I'm not sure in the survey we have the income level. I will check to see if we have some elements on income, but I suspect I welcome very much your observation. I think it's really relevant. I mean, it's worth trying, but I suspect there's no significant elements in this way because you say longer. If you look at the typical peri-urban fabric, it's peri-urban fabric. There, it's not poor areas at all. It's not. There's no social housing in those areas. So in the survey, we have some stations that are located close to social housing, and the fact is that in this area we have no scooter users. That's true. Well, okay. I think I take it on board. I take it on board because I think we could investigate in this direction, but possibly not so much related to space as you suggest.
Well, thank you in any case for your question. And if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to write it in the chat or to contact us, and then we'll be able to forward the questions and hopefully provide some answers to you after the events. And without further ado, please, Gerrit, if you can take the floor and give your presentation. Thank you again.
Great. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides and we can hear you.
Great, terrific. So it's my honor to participate in this webinar, and great to see my French colleagues. We hope that with the pandemic behind us, we can renew our partnership and once again engage in exchange and working together on some of these things. Great presentation, Alain. I will say that we have done similar work on bike and scooter demand and find quite similar results to Alain. One of the things, just to comment quickly on Alain's presentation, at least in Washington DC, it's tourism that is really a major driver of the demand for both bikes and scooters. And similarly in Washington, low-income riders tend not to be riders. We suspect it's partly because of their lack of access to credit cards, right? That you need to use credit cards to get access to these things. And we also find that in bikes, at least, and to some extent scooters, for short trips, they are substitutes for transit ridership, but for long trips, they are complements, right? So that people use access of bikes and scooters to access the transit system for long trips when they're making long trips, but on short trips, sometimes, they'll take the bike or the scooter instead. And so it's in that case a substitute for. So look forward to having more conversations with you, Alain, about that. Right, so I'm Gerrit Knaap. I direct the Smart Growth Center. I appreciate Isabelle describing the Smart Growth Center and the kind of work that we do. I'm going to be talking about work that we are doing in the Purple Line corridor. This presentation is not as technical as Alain's. This is much more about our efforts to engage in the process of developing an equitable transit corridor. So as Isabelle said, we do a lot of technical work and fancy modeling. Oops, how do I get rid of this? Can you all see that? I'm trying to get rid of this. How do I get rid of this?
Yes, we're on the slide with the purple line. Oh.
Yeah, I'm trying to get rid of this little. Can you see the?
Yeah, we see the map now.
Yeah, but do you also see the open window that is in the way?
No, it's full screen. It's full screen. It's okay. It's okay, Gerrit. You can go on.
It works.
Is working okay? There's nothing in the way. I have some kind of window I can't seem to get rid of. You don't see this window about panelists and chat and so forth, I gather.
No, it's we can see your full screen.
All right, great. So it's just an annoyance on my end. All right, so let me talk about the Purple Line, right? The Purple Line is a new light rail transit system that is going to be coming to the Washington, D.C. metro area very soon. It's 16 miles, 21 stations. It's the first light rail line in metropolitan Washington. It's circumferential, which is interesting in that comparison to what's happening in France. There are hopes that it will be completely circumferential around Washington, D.C., but things go slowly, so we're starting with this one segment. It's going to travel at grade, which means on the street, which is, again, new for Washington, D.C. It's going to go through some relatively low-density suburban developments here, right? So it's not in the hardcore urban area with relatively high densities, but much more a typical American suburban development pattern. The transit modeling suggests that it's going to have roughly 69,000 daily riders by the year 2030, and its estimated opening is 2024, although that date keeps changing for reasons I will not elaborate on here, but all transit projects in the United States are politically controversial, and there are lots of legal and other mechanisms that folks can use to delay their progress, so that's partly what's going on. So I said this before, it's the first circumferential. It will fit within the existing Washington Metro transit system, although it will be operated by the Maryland Transit Administration, not the same administration that operates the rest of the system, which of course introduces new institutional complexities. It will, however, connect to the existing Metro system at 4 stations and 3 lines, the red and the yellow and the green line. And it will have connections to MARC, which is one of our commuter rail systems in Maryland, and to Amtrak, which is the national rail system. So the alignment will run through 2 counties in Maryland. It is a very diverse socioeconomic context. On the west side, we have mostly wealthy white residents in the Montgomery County side of the corridor. In the center, we have sort of more low-income immigrant communities that occupy the corridor. We also have the University of Maryland in the middle of the corridor. And on the east side, we have more diverse working-class bedroom communities. But again, a large employment node at New Carrollton, which is on the far east side of the system. So a very diverse corridor. So we know that when we introduce new transit facilities within a metropolitan context, that it has the potential for displacement and concerns a lot of folks. So the National Center for Smart Growth, which I direct, formed what we call the Purple Line Corridor Coalition. And we got this idea from other places in the United States, like Denver and Portland and Seattle and other places, where the focus of this organization is to try to maximize the benefits. We know that transit is going to bring lots of benefits and jobs and economic development and so forth. But we also know that new investments in transit can have adverse effects, such as rising property values and displacement of residents, and perhaps displacement of businesses as well. So this coalition is a multi-sector coalition. I think it's relatively unique in the United States, and I suspect there's not a lot of examples of this in Europe. It's a coalition that includes us, the university partners. It includes the 2 county governments. It includes immigrant advocacy organizations such as Casa de Maryland. It includes Enterprise Community Partners, which is an affordable housing organization, and it includes the both planning departments. So it's a very interesting group of government agencies, of university folks, and of advocacy organizations. One of the things that we did very early on is develop what we call the Community Development Agreement. right? Did a lot of public engagement, exercises, and cobbled out this agreement that I will describe further in just a moment. So the community development agreement was signed by the two county executives, the president of the University of Maryland, the heads of the local planning agencies, and lots of interest groups. And we had a big signing event in which we all committed to this agenda of trying to build a more sustainable and equitable corridor, because there certainly will be transportation advantages to this new investment in transit. But perhaps more importantly, there's a new potential to create a more sustainable corridor, right? A new sustainable place to live and to work and so forth. So our mission at the Purple Line Corridor Coalition is what we focus on, we call beyond the tracks, right? We're not so interested in building the train or in operating the train, but we're interested in everything around the train. So the Community Development Agreement has essentially 4 goals. One focused on businesses, which says we want diverse, locally established business to survive and thrive both during and after the construction period. On the workforce side, we want to make sure that workers in the corridor are well trained and well matched with employers in skills and location. On the housing side, we're interested that housing opportunities exist within the existing communities of the corridor, especially for low income, middle income, and transit dependent households. And finally, the fourth is a community, which is a bit of a catch-all that says that we want vibrant, sustainable communities that enhance the health, the culture, and sense of place. So the Community Development Agreement has a lot of details in terms of what we intend to do, but it's generally, we want to pursue these 4 goals to create an equitable corridor. It's certainly partly about transportation, but like I said earlier, it's more about all the other things that are necessary to complement that transportation investment. This is a busy slide, but I just want to make the point here that our steering committee for the community development, for the Purple Line Corridor Coalition includes a diverse set of folks. So again, it includes us, the University of Maryland, it includes the 2 county planning departments, it includes advocacy organizations, it includes housing, affordable housing organizations and so forth. So a very diverse group of folks. So on the housing side, I remember I said that we have essentially 4 goals, and we formed 4 committees essentially to further each of those 4 goals. So again, here's a description of what the housing goal is, and to further progress toward that goal, we developed a very specific housing action plan and formed what we call the Housing Accelerator Action Team. And this action team includes nearly 100 different members. It created the Housing Action Plan in December 19, which outlines specific steps for assuring that we maintain housing affordability in the corridor. And we have a specific target of identifying a specific number of housing units that we want to maintain affordable to households at under 60% of average median income. On the small business development side, again, we have a committee that works specifically on the small business part. It has about 50 members. We are just completing a small business action plan. We know that businesses are adversely affected, by the construction. This problem has just gotten worse with respect to COVID, of course, the struggles that small businesses, particularly minority businesses, have for survival in this period. So what we're hoping to do as part of the action plan on the small business side is identify and place-based managers for each of the stations in the corridor, and which will then facilitate service coordination, business district marketing, and policy. So we're not only going to help each of the individual businesses in the corridor, but help them work together to make sure that the communities, the business communities in each of the stations of the corridor are successful. We also have a workforce development goal. There are lots of immigrant, low-income residents within the community. We want to make sure that they get their share of the construction jobs. And we want to also make sure that the new environment that the Purple Line will create in terms of economic development will lead to the employment and the social advancement of the existing low-income residents of the corridor and not simply bring in people from the outside. The last goal is around vibrant communities and placemaking. Alain showed some great illustrations of what's the urban form looks like around a couple of the stations. We are doing similar work on measuring urban form, identifying places where there are green spaces, where there are open markets and other attributes of a very vibrant community. So there's a whole group, again, that's working on this element of the project as well. And finally, finally that I'm going to present, there are other pieces to this, but we've developed something that we call the Equity Leadership Council. As I mentioned before, this transit project is going to include 2 counties. And in order to do the work that we need to do and be successful at what we're doing, we need political support. So we have formed what we call a caucus, or this Equity Leadership Council, which includes many of the state political elected officials and the local political elected officials, and in some of the federal elected officials. So they talk to each other so they can develop an agenda for a successful implementation of the Community Development Agreement. Perhaps the thing that the National Center for Smart Growth and the work that me and my graduate students do that is most useful and unique with respect to what's happening in the corridor is the data and analytical tools that we can bring to bear. So we have created a data dashboard. We have identified specific targets that we want to achieve in the corridor with respect to housing and businesses and workforce, and we're going to measure our progress. So we have really good data resources, and we have really smart graduate students. And so we have built this data dashboard that measures our progress in terms of where we are going. And don't forget, we're doing this now, 3 or 4 to 5 years before the line is even running. So we're going to be very able to identify how this investment in transit has affected this community, and to see whether or not we are successful at minimizing the adverse effects and successful at maximizing the beneficial impacts. So I'm trying to see what my headline is because I can't see it. What is this? What does this slide say on the top? I can't read it. What's the title of this slide? Anybody help me out?
It's talking about the bi-county coordination.
Okay, yes, thank you. My header is there, and I don't want to take the time to figure out how to fix it. As I mentioned, this is a project that covers 2 counties. Frankly, if it was only within 1 county or 1 political jurisdiction, it makes less sense for us to even be involved in this, because you could say, look, this local government can take care of this problem. We have local governments, we have state governments. What's the university doing messing in this kind of political activity? And the answer is, this is a project that spans 2 counties and multiple jurisdictions, lots of school systems. As I mentioned, it's going to have to interface with the existing transportation systems like Metro, like 3 different bus systems. So the fact that we've got this very complicated institutional context creates what we think is an opportunity for us to provide some leadership in providing the coordination among these organizations within the corridor, and provides a voice for all the interest groups and all the players that are interested in making sure that this project works well. So, as I said before, our role is to facilitate dialogue among the partners, all these entities that are involved in this project. We have 14 members of our steering committee. We have almost 160 members of the action groups within those working groups. We had 57 signatories to the Community Development Agreement, and over 1,000 stakeholders who have been engaged in some of our public engagement processes. So our work here is really a coordinating effort, providing information, coordination, leadership, political advocacy that one government or one organization simply can't do. Among our successes is that we have gotten a $5 million grant from the JP Morgan Chase to some of our partners for affordable housing development, making loans and capital available for affordable housing. We have seen $5 million of investment by Kaiser Permanente, which is a health organization who has recognized that housing is a big and important part of facilitating community and public health. We recently received a $2 million grant from the Federal Transit Administration to do a transit-oriented development plan for the entire corridor. The elements of that grant that we are deeply involved in right now, one is to formalize and expand the coalition to create some institutional structure so that this coalition lives beyond the initial start of the project. We are going to conduct a corridor-wide transportation and TOD analysis, and we're going to devise a comprehensive plan and preservation strategy for the small businesses. And finally, we will prepare a detailed TOD and economic development strategy. So these are the deliverables that we are currently working on to deliver to the Federal Transit Administration. Among the tools that we are able to bring to the corridor and to the work, as I've described or mentioned earlier, we have this data dashboard which you can click on and look at all the data that we have in the corridor and the time series data to see how things are progressing. We have built a multifamily housing tool. This tool allows anyone, frankly, to go online and identify what rents are in different parts of the corridor, and allows us, of course, as researchers to monitor the evolution of rents. We have, in fact, already done some econometric work that shows that rents are already beginning to rise within the corridor. They are rising specifically at transit stations and specifically at the new ones. So the ones where there is connectivity to the metro system at the red line and the green line and the yellow line, those aren't impacted very much, right? Because there isn't a whole lot of great new connectivity at those stations. But particularly the ones in between in some of the low-income residential communities, we are seeing tremendous pressure on some of the housing prices and rents in the community. We've done some story mapping, if you know what that is. This is essentially a web interface where we have stories of some of the immigrant communities and the places that are important to them. And you're able to see why certain parks and certain schools are really important to these immigrant communities, besides many of the sort of traditional housing and businesses and so forth. And then Prince George's County also has a specific web planning tool that you can go to identify and do some analysis of what's going on in the corridor. Our most interesting and technical work at the moment, which is a little similar to what's being done in Paris, we're using this software tool called Sugar Access. And this is a software tool that allows us to identify accessibility to places throughout the Montgomery and Prince George's counties. So you see in that green map on the right, this is the difference. It's a map that depicts the change in the number of the jobs that are accessible at any point in the two counties as a result of the investment in the Purple Line system. So you can see that at the very far left end and at the very right end, there's some dark patches, and that suggests that as a result of the Purple Line, there is going to be a lot more access to jobs in those particular places. One of the things that you can see if you look at the far left is that, on the end, where the connection is to the red line, there's not great difference in accessibility, but in between the red line accessibility points between Bethesda and Chevy Chase, if you know the region, there's going to be a lot of increase in access to jobs. And this tool allows us to identify access to jobs, access to healthcare, access to grocery stores, access to you name it. And we're able to use this kind of analysis then to make sure that we design transportation systems that complement the Purple Line with respect to buses and bikes and scooters and all the other things, so that low-income residents, and particularly minority residents, gain access to jobs and health facilities and grocery stores and so forth. And finally, we're using this tool called Mapcraft. This is a tool that we're using with a consulting firm in Portland, Oregon called Echo Northwest. The lower graph below identifies places where middle income housing is now financially feasible, whereas it wasn't before. Let me back up a second. what this craft does is essentially is take GIS layers and identifies and attaches a pro forma to every parcel. Right, so every parcel's got a pro forma attached to it. And then when you increase accessibility, you can see that the potential rents on that property increase. And so what we've been able to do using this tool is, if you look at that middle rise building in the lower right hand graph and the little yellow circles in the map, these are places that, as a result of the purple line, we think that these products will now become financially available, financially feasible. So by combining the accessibility analysis and by combining this real estate analysis, we think we are going to be able to provide useful information to the local planners and others about, first of all, how mobility has changed within the corridor, and then how real estate markets will change in the corridor to facilitate a more equitable, sustainable Purple Line corridor. So that's my story. If you're interested in learning more, one of the things that the federal grant did was allow us to hire a director for the PLCC. Her name is Sheila. Her email is there. And if you're interested in learning more about our work in the Purple Line corridor, go to that URL. Thanks, I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you a lot, Gerrit, for this very interesting presentation and very interesting initiative that you're directing with the Purple Line corridor is consortium, right? Or
coalition.
Coalition, yeah, coalition. And have many questions, but I see that Alain already is with his hand up. And so, Alain, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Gerrit. It's yeah, you know, it's just it's a question and also maybe a suggestion. My question is, who took the initiative of the coalition? Because I mean, in the French and as far as I know, in the European references, we don't have the equivalent of that sort of instrument. The only thing that maybe vaguely connect to what you described, which is really interesting, is Contradax. So that's a French instrument that was introduced about 10 years ago.
Yeah,
with
Contradax, yeah.
Yeah, Contradax. So yeah, so it's just maybe a possible connection if we want to compare or to discuss transatlantic connections. But yeah, really, my question is, who took the initiative? Because you said 2 counties, it's covering 2 counties, so you don't have a single territorial leadership, so you have to care for this. But,
yeah.
But at the end of the day, who promotes, who was the first, the university, or
yeah.
who?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to immodestly say we did, right? So when you run a research center, you know that you have typical places that you can go for funding, right? People who fund research. Much of the foundation community, you know, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Cerner Foundation, those kinds of organizations don't care about the research that you produce and gets, you know, published and put in libraries that nobody reads. What they care about is helping people, right? And so when we took on this role of being more actively engaged and actually doing stuff on the ground, they're much more interested in funding that kind of work. And by doing that kind of work, we actually develop the resources that we can do to support our research initiatives, right? So we think we're providing an important community benefit. As Isabelle said, this is part of our mission, but it's also a bit self-serving in that not only do we get to help the people in the community, but it also helps our research mission a lot in that we can generate these data and find funding to do these tools so that we can say, not only are we going to be advanced science and research, but we're actually going to make people better off. And that's been a compelling argument, and it's worked out really well for us. Does that answer your question, Ali?
Absolutely, it's really interesting it's fascinating to see how a university can become a territorial actor. I mean that's really striking.
I mean, you could make the argument that we are what's called a land grant university, right, where we're supposed to actually help people. People are skeptical about that. They think that university professors, sit in their ivory towers and publish research that nobody reads. Yeah. So this is an example of where we're actually, doing what we're expected to do.
Okay.
Well, we have still a couple of more minutes. Nacima, I think you wanted to maybe say a quick word, and then Isabelle.
Very short, perhaps very, very short, so I put my hand down. But only to react to the comparison between the partnership that Gerrit showed us. I'm not so sure that it can be completely comparable with Contradax, because Contradax is a governance tool. And I think it's much more. It's about community building, and it's it's perhaps this partnership dimension, the way people become committed to a joint project, seems to me could perhaps be compared to the rail partnerships in UK, for example. So it's perhaps between Contradax and other types of not only public policy, but the way to build communities around infrastructures. But it could be a broader discussion, perhaps.
Yes, like a fun discussion.
Yeah.
Isabelle, if it's a direct comment.
Yeah, I would like just to say that the complexity of the issues in Washington is absolutely mind-boggling, because I live just above the purple line in Greenbelt. I'm on the planning advisory committee, and the federal government has a huge amount of land there, and they want to actually move the Bureau of Engraving, which is like La Monnaie in France, to that big stretch of agricultural land. And they have absolutely no idea about trying to hook that with public transportation. They are planning a 1,200 place parking lot for 1,600 people working there, telling us, I mean, and basically they can do whatever they want. It's federal land, and no matter what the locals say, they are going to build that gigantic facility and have, assuming that everybody comes from south by car, and this is going to create havoc in our communities. So I think that unfortunately in Washington, as much as the Purple Line can really help, we are in a bind when it comes to the overall picture of the region. And I don't see, maybe Gerrit has some ideas of how it can improve, but I do have major fears that there may be juxtapositions of success stories and enormous failures in what is being planned.
As you know, Isabelle, we've also done some fairly large-scale modeling of the Baltimore-Washington region. Not that we have all the answers, but we have engaged and done some modeling analysis at that scale. Does the federal government listen to us? Well, they're not a member of our coalition, so maybe not.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. I mean, the notion of the federal government is a little different in France, or the way in which power is distributed is not exactly the same. So the FBI also, the move of the FBI to the Greenbelt station has, and the time it takes is absolutely mind-boggling too. So we are seeing all these kind of interferences of initiatives, which are very, very difficult to forecast in the far future.
I see that Hiroaki Suzuki, you wanted to ask another question, and I'm not sure if Anna Isabella Saraiva, you also wanted to ask a question, but Hiroaki, if you want to go first.
I'm very glad that pipeline is on progress, and I'm extremely delighted that coalition is paying attention to housing affordability. However, I'm very much worried about the gentrification effect. Anytime when the new transit investment takes place, the land price of the corridor, or especially the area close to station area, tend to increase. And especially, I'm living in the Great Washington area, so I have experience. I've seen 10 to 20% average real estate price increase this year. So how really realistically you can think that you can provide affordable housing to especially those who don't own land, because those who own land and property can get the benefit of land price increase, but those tenant or renter could be crowded out by this gentrification effect. Thank you.
Well, you're quite right. Everybody expects that to happen, and we're trying not to let that happen. Right? How do you mitigate or try to battle gentrification? And the answer is you've got to work on several fronts. So we do have inclusionary zoning policies in Montgomery County. We're working at inclusionary zoning policies in Prince George's County. There are rights of first refusals for when developers buy properties that the existing residents can perhaps buy some of that property. We are building this capital fund that's going to build new affordable housing. Now, will that prevent gentrification? Probably not, but we can help mitigate it to some extent. I will also say that it's not just on the housing front, but it's also on the small business front. We want to make sure that the small locally owned businesses can remain in the corridor, and some of the cultural aspects. Remember, I was talking about those story maps, that if you replace the local pupuseria with a Taco Bell, it's not the same thing, right? And so trying to preserve the existing cultural amenities is part of the gentrification mitigation strategy as well. So I appreciate the question. It's a formidable challenge, but that is our mission, right? To try to prevent the gentrification and displacement of the low-income residents of the community. And wish us luck, perhaps.
Thank you very much.
Gerrit, maybe I had a little different question for you, but since we've been discussing within this series of webinars, the use of new tools, new approaches to trying to solve these urban issues and the issues of security and trust. Like you mentioned a lot of different dashboard data tools and all kinds of new useful like a visualization. Is there any data on who uses those tools? Like, are the inhabitants of those places also using it, or is it mainly policymakers or researchers using it? Do you have any kind of engagement initiative on that front?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the answer is we don't fully know, of course. We aren't able to do the data analytics that you can get, that any website will give you, right? And you could do some analysis of that. My intuition is that it gets mostly used by the advocacy organizations, right? The organizations that promote affordable housing and the organizations that promote workforce development and small business preservation, right? It tends not to be, the owner of the restaurant who works, from 8 till, 9 at night, trying to keep the business alive. It's not those people. It does tend to be some of the rich people in Bethesda and Chevy Chase. They'll use the data to make their arguments as well. But on the low income side or on the more progressive side, it is a useful tool to many of the advocacy organizations. And then we can bring that to this advocacy group of elected officials, for example. And so that, it's not, every low-income resident on the corridor that's using these tools, but it's more of what we call not a grassroots, but a grass tops sort of approach to try to preserve the corridor. Yeah, it's a good question.
Thanks for the answer. And I don't know if Nacima, you wanted to add maybe a last few words to conclude this webinar and. Oh, Your
thank you,
mic is
Kevin.
off.
I won't be long. Yes, thank you, Kevin. I won't be long. I think that these two presentations have shown how, well, the two elements. In first, perhaps, how rapidly the situation is changing our metropolises, and we see the technology which is driving with new mobilities, these solutions of e-scooters, which were quite in existence 5 years ago and which are now being more and more present in the landscapes and in the mobility habits and routines. So I think we have to, as researchers, we have to try to be up to date and to follow a very transitory and rapidly changing situation. But anyway, there is also perhaps place for the long term and retrospective and prospective perspectives, and we have to sometimes try to say yes, technology is leading, and we have new demands, new mobility systems, and also new tools, as you were telling just now, with the possibility of visualization, mapping, and modeling all these new realities. And as well, I think taking time to see the long-term transition and the path dependency dimension, as well as the way the structural dimension and the morphology and structure of these very big cities shapes the transformations, and the way it's not so easy to adapt and to put new infrastructure into what's existing. So Gerrit's presentation, I think, gives us very useful insights as what we are witnessing in Paris today also, because in my contacts with as well Paris region, I have yesterday evening meeting with Institut Paris Région, which is our regional agence d'urbanisme, you know, Alain, and it is rewriting the regional planning, DRIF, Schéma Directeur d'Île-de-France, for its new cycle of planning. And well, I would say infrastructure, hubs, networks are still, and stations are still very important element in the shaping of the regional and urban planning. But public value, community building, the user-oriented vision and the user participation to the process is as well, I think, a growing concern. So the way we plan, for whom we plan, and how we can plan with people who are, not so much in line with the difficulties. I speak for the French side of what we call the millefeuille, that is to say, the very intricate and complicated entanglement of institutions and competencies and perimeters and well. So I hope, I really and sincerely hope that we have shortly the possibility to build new partnerships and new research collaborations, because what you do in Washington, D.C. is definitely useful and a necessity in order to enrich, to shed light on elements that we are now trying to help institutions and stakeholders to insert in their planning. And maybe this kind of new research on, for example, scooters, as we knew, and perhaps with this comparison between Paris, but also Marseille or other big cities in France, because our regional capitals are changing rapidly as well. Bordeaux or other region capitals are rising very rapidly. So I hope this maybe can give a wider, broader approach to Gerrit and other colleagues and colleagues. So thank you so much. I think that this webinar will be an element in the process for future collaboration.
Well, thank you again, Nacima, for your
Yeah.
words of encouragement. I think it's a great way to end this webinar, talking about user-centric urban planning and partnership between the United States and France. So thank you again all for attending, and a recording of the webinar will be available soon, and we will be in touch with you, and don't hesitate to contact us at the embassy as well. Thank you so much. Have a good evening in France.
Thank
and
you.
good day to you for American colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bonsoir. Au revoir.
Bye bye.
Well,
Bye.
See you next time, physically, I hope.